Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying Volume 2, Chapters 31 through 40. This is the book that's titled Walking the Path with the Buddha. This is Volume 2 of the book series because a few weeks ago we restarted this program from the beginning. And as you guys probably know, you don't need to start from the beginning, but it's always nice to have started from the beginning. And what we're doing is each week we're just going chapter by chapter, studying 10 chapters a week, gradually learning those and being able to reflect on them and then integrate them into your practice. And if you've had a foundational learning in our group learning program or any of our other programs, this will really help to fill out your framework and be able to more deeply understand the teachings using the original words of the Buddha. And if you're studying these chapters before class or after class, you'll really be able to penetrate into it because you'll be able to take your time, maybe 1 or 2 chapters a day, because they're kind of short. There may be a page or sometimes even a half a page, but then you've got words from me to be able to really penetrate into it and be able to more fully understand and reflect on what it is that the Buddha is teaching. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. The way that I do this program is I invite students from Zoom to be able to read one of the chapters as we go through. And then after someone reads, then I will share some teachings on that chapter. And then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys have on the individual chapters. If you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can ask questions by putting those into the comment section. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like. So if you'd like to volunteer to read in Zoom, just let me know by electronically raising your hand, and I'll be able to see that and then call on you to be able to read one of the chapters. I'm just going to switch this over so that everybody can see. Looks like Samantha's volunteering. Okay, Samantha, feel free to go ahead and jump in there and read.
A strong post or pillar is a designation for mindfulness. And how, monks, is their restraint? Here, having seen a form with the eye, having heard a sound with the ear, having smelt an odor with the nose, having tasted a flavor with the tongue, having touched a physical object with the body, having recognized a mental object with the mind, a monk is not intent upon a pleasing form and not repelled by a displeasing form. He resides having set up mindfulness of the body with a measureless mind, and he understands as it really is that liberation of mind, liberation of wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states are eliminated without remainder. It is in such a way that there is restraint. Suppose, monks, a man would catch 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds, and tie them by a strong rope. He would catch a snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and monkey, and tie each by a strong rope. Having done so, he would bind them to a strong post or pillar. Then those 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds would each pull in the direction of its own feeding ground and domain. The snake would pull one way, thinking, "Let me enter an anthill." The crocodile would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter the water." The bird would pull another way, thinking, "Let me fly up into the sky." The dog would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter a village." The jackal would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter a charnel ground." The monkey would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter a forest." Now, when these 6 animals become worn out and fatigued, they would stand close to that post or pillar. They would sit down there. They would lie down there. So too, monks, when a monk has developed and cultivated mindfulness directed to the body, the eye does not pull in the direction of agreeable forms, nor are disagreeable forms repulsive. The ear does not pull in the direction of agreeable sounds, nor are disagreeable sounds repulsive. The nose does not pull in the direction of agreeable odors, nor are disagreeable odors repulsive. The tongue does not pull in the direction of agreeable flavors, nor are disagreeable flavors found repulsive. The body does not pull in the direction of agreeable physical objects, nor are disagreeable physical objects repulsive. The mind does not pull in the direction of agreeable mental objects, nor are disagreeable mental objects repulsive. It is in such a way that there is restraint. A strong post or pillar, This, monks, is a designation for mindfulness directed to the body. Therefore, monks, you should train yourselves thus. We will develop and cultivate mindfulness directed to the body, make it our vehicle, make it our basis, stabilize it, exercise ourselves in it, and fully perfect it. Thus should you train yourselves.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So this is a great little analogy that the Buddha is sharing that's talking about the strong post or pillar and how the mind is going to be pulling, right? And he's using these animals to talk about the 6 different animals pulling in these opposite directions. And that's what the mind is doing with its central desire, that when you have central desire in the mind, that the mind is pulling in all these different directions. This is craving, desire, attachment, that the eyes are looking for some agreeable form, longing, yearning for that, but then is repulsed by disagreeable forms. And then the same thing with the ears. The mind is longing and yearning through the ears, wanting agreeable sounds. And then when it hears disagreeable sounds, it's repulsed by these. And the same thing is happening with the nose and odors, the tongue and flavors, the body and physical objects, and then the mind and mental objects. These are the 6 sense bases. And what you're looking to do is you're looking to build restraint. And this is how you get rid of central desire, where you can learn to enjoy something, but you don't get conditioned pleasant feelings and you don't have conditioned painful feelings in these situations. So the way that you develop restraint is that you develop your breathing mindfulness meditation. And that's the post and the pillar, like these animals that are tied to. And now the mind's going to be pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling. And you keep yanking it back and yanking it back and yanking it back and yanking it back. And over time, those animals getting tired, they're going to sit down and lay down by that post or pillar. Your mind's going to do exactly the same thing. That if you develop this mindfulness or awareness of mind in meditation, and you can see the mind moving off the breath, and you cut that off and let it go and bring the mind back to the breath over a consistent long-term period, the mind will eventually be quieted and stilled. You're never going to eliminate your thoughts during meditation or outside of meditation, but you will get to a point where in your meditation, when you have a thought, you'll notice it sooner and sooner, and you'll be able to cut it off easier and easier and let it go. And you'll have these long periods of stillness and quietness in the mind versus when maybe you first started meditating, you had a bombardment of thoughts, or you might have indulged in a thought for a period of time and followed it. And then you realize like, oh yeah, 2 or 3 minutes later, I'm meditating, let me bring the mind back. But now you can build in this restraint where in meditation, you're restraining the mind and pulling it back to the breath. That's the post or pillar. But then you would like to be able to do the same exact thing in day-to-day life. That if you're out and about and doing various things, you're going to be experiencing contact through these sense spaces. You're going to be seeing certain forms with the eyes, certain sounds with the ears, certain odors with the nose, certain flavors with the tongue, certain physical objects with the body, and then certain mental objects going through the mind. And oftentimes when the mind is experiencing a craving and it's repulsed by something, it will push this thing away, thinking that that's going to solve the problem. But with craving, desire, attachment in the mind's going to see some things as agreeable, and then it's going to see some things as disagreeable. And the mind wants these agreeable things to be permanent. It wants permanently agreeable contact because it gets those conditioned pleasant feelings in that situation. But then when it experiences disagreeable contact, meaning disagreeable because of its cravings, it sees this thing as disagreeable, it will be repulsed by that and want to push it away, or become bitter, harsh, and hostile, or put expectations on people. So for example, if you're driving and you're at a stoplight and you hear this wonderful music that's next to you, maybe it's your favorite music, like hip hop or rap or something. And you're like, yeah, that's my tune. Like, come on, let's dance, let's go. And then that's really agreeable to you. And you get all these pleasant feelings and you get so happy and excited with that music from the person next to you. But then you pull up to the next traffic light and you hear some music maybe that you don't like. You despise this because of your craving for rap music or hip hop music. Maybe this heavy metal music or instrumental music is repulsive to you because of the craving. And now the mind arises this frustration or agitation or annoyance. And the Buddhas have shared with you in the Four Noble Truths and in other teachings how the mind is doing this. It's craving permanently agreeable contact. And when it gets what it wants, it gets those pleasant feelings. But when it doesn't get what it wants, it gets these painful feelings. Well, you're going to need to build this restraint that when you see the mind longing, yearning through these sense spaces, you're able to restrain the mind and pull it back. not just in meditation, but in day-to-day life as well. So in this scenario where that person pulls up with the hip hop or rap music, rather than, going berserk and getting so excited, sure, dance, have fun, enjoy the music, but understand that this is impermanent and you're not going to hear this permanently. And understand that if there's any conditional pleasant feelings that are arising, you need to be able to spot that with the bodily sensations, that there's these bodily sensations associated with the arising of a conditioned feeling, not just the painful ones, but even the pleasant conditioned feelings have bodily sensations. And even the neither painful nor pleasant feelings, they have bodily sensations too. And if you've developed in meditation and you've developed outside of meditation, you'll be cluing into these bodily sensations more and more. And rather than allow the mind to get that conditioned pleasant feeling when the hip hop or rap music is playing, you cut that off if it's arising. So then when you pull up to the next light, and now this person has music that you don't particularly care for, now you're just like, okay, well, if he enjoys the music or she enjoys that music, that's wonderful for them. It's impermanent. No need to form a conditioned feeling of frustration or agitation just because of this impermanent situation. And this is where you can restrain the mind. There are no secrets on the path to enlightenment. But if there's like one particular thing that you really need to clue into and understand, is that the conditioned pleasant feelings are just as much of a problem as the conditioned painful feelings. If you can understand that the conditioned pleasant feelings of happiness, excitement, elation are just as much of a problem, it's because the mind is forming happiness based on this condition of this music, that condition not being permanent. Now, when that condition changes, it's going to end up in the painful feelings. So if you allow the mind to have the conditional pleasant feelings about anything at all, when that condition changes, it's going to end up in the conditional painful feelings. So this is how you get to the permanent, unconditioned happiness, is that you don't allow the mind to have the conditioned pleasant feelings. That when you see the mind that's getting ready to do that, you cut that off and let it go. And you do this through developing what the Buddha is talking about here with mindfulness directed at the body. That this is during your daily meditations, as you're focused on the breath and you're noticing the mind's moving off the breath, yes, you're cutting that off and letting it go and bring the mind back to the breath. That's the post and pillar that you're bringing the mind back to. But then when you notice those bodily sensations in meditation, here we're just going to say like an itch, but that's not the bodily sensations we're talking about with the cravings, desires, attachments. But let's just say in meditation, you get this little itch and you have this urge to scratch it. Instead, just notice that arises, it changes, and it fades away, restraining the mind, observing the impermanent nature of this itch. Now you're becoming more and more aware of the bodily sensations. But the bodily sensations that we're talking about here that are going to be an early warning system that you can restrain the mind, this is associated with craving, desire, attachment, that tightening in the chest, that tightening in the throat, the heat in the face, the pressure in the skull. Those are the bodily sensations before the mind gets angry, for example, or frustrated or agitated. That's the early warning system. But even these pleasant feelings, they have an early warning system too. There's a bodily sensation. I don't know for you, but for me, it was like a tingling across the shoulders and the back of the neck and over the head. That's the way that I would experience pleasant feelings. And you could see it was getting ready to come on. So this early warning system, whether it's a pleasant feeling or painful feeling, is essentially telling the mind like, hey, I'm about to get a conditioned feeling. I'm about to get a conditioned feeling. I'm about to get a conditioned feeling. And if you allow that to happen, the mind's like, thank goodness I got my conditioned feeling. Oh, this is so great. I'm going to keep doing this. This is so wonderful. I got my pleasant feeling. But then later on, when that condition changes, you're feeling miserable because the painful feelings come in. So what you would like to do is be able to spot this, that if you've learned about the body, the mind, and then there's this person, which is the third thing, the person needs to be observant and see that, hey, the mind is about to get a conditioned feeling, about to get a conditioned feeling, about to get a conditioned feeling, and now you don't allow that to happen, whether it's a pleasant feeling or painful feeling. And this comes through developing the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is awareness of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects. And the Buddha is using this analogy of the 6 animals to represent the 6 sense bases of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself. And just like these animals are going to get fatigued and worn out If you pull your mind and you restrain it more and more, your mind's going to get exhausted. This is why you can't actually meditate for like 10, 12 hours if you do it the way that the Buddha actually taught, because you're just constantly pulling the mind back and pulling it back and pulling it back. You're going to only be able to meditate for maybe when you first start 10, 15, 20 minutes and building up to 30 minutes. And that's really all you need is up to 30 minutes. And now the mind can be restrained and restrained and restrained and restrained and restrained. And over a consistent long-term period, we're talking months and years, the mind essentially learns no sense to pull. They're just going to pull me back. They're just going to yank me back to this post and pillar. And I'm just not going to keep pulling like this. It just sits down and is calm there. So you'd like to do that in meditation, but also in daily life. Like, let's just say you're walking through the mall and you see a brand new pair of shoes. And wow, the mind's starting to get so excited about this. And you see the mind longing, yearning through the eyes. You'd like to restrain the mind and pull it back. Don't allow it to get those pleasant feelings. Because if you go in the store and they have your shoes, you'll get so excited and happy. But if they don't have your size, you're going to get frustrated or agitated. So you like to pull the mind back and restrain the mind. And just, if you need to go in and look at the shoes, go ahead and look at them. But then think about, do I need this or does the mind want this? Because there's this unquenchable thirst. The central desire, the mind's just going to be longing, yearning, and just thinking the next thing is going to provide some kind of lasting satisfaction. If it's not the shoes, it's more money. If it's not more money, it's a brand new boyfriend or girlfriend. If it's not a new boyfriend or girlfriend, it's a new house or a new car or new jewelry or something else. More money. The mind just chases and chases and chases. So the Buddha is teaching you how to build in this restraint where you can pull things back and train the mind to be restrained. But ultimately, by the time you restrain the mind in this way, more and more, you'll ultimately get to a point where there isn't agreeable and disagreeable objects or contact that the mind is experiencing. As long as there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, you're going to see some things as agreeable and some things as disagreeable because there's craving. So for example, as it relates to food, you might have certain foods that you really, really like, and these are agreeable to you, and you seek out those foods. But then when there's foods around that you find to be disagreeable, you maybe will push those away and you're not interested in those. And this is the mind having central desire as it relates to just another sense base. It's the same underlying problem, which is central desire, but it's just another sense base. It's not the eyes or the ears. Now we're talking about the tongue. So what you're going to need to do, in addition to the things that I'm talking about with breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and generosity, to train the mind to let go. And then in the moment where you see the mind craving and desiring, you're going to need to restrain the mind. You're also going to need to put the mind in the situation that it doesn't want to be in. So when you're at that social event or you're at that restaurant and they're serving something that the mind doesn't particularly care for in terms of food, you're going to need to eat those foods and train the mind to just see this food as something to nourish the body. If you don't like heavy metal music, you're going to need to put the mind in that situation and listen to that. Put the mind in that situation so it can maintain its contentedness no matter what it's experiencing. And there's other situations like this. Maybe you don't like to be around large crowds and you don't want to be around large crowds. And when you're around large crowds, you feel very nervous and shaken up. This is the mind's craving, desire, attachment, the central desire. Whenever we're talking about craving, desire, attachment, we're talking about the fetter of central desire. And you would like to be able to spot those cravings, identify them, and then put a plan together where you can put the mind in that situation, having already done the proactive training consistently on a long-term basis and continuing to do the breathing, mindfulness, meditation, the generosity, and restraining the mind in the situation. You're going to also need to put the mind in the situation so that it can potentially trigger that craving, desire, attachment, and then you can cut it off and cut it off and cut it off. And it's essentially like trimming back a wild bush, and you keep trimming it back and trimming it back and trimming it back and trimming it back until eventually you uproot this out of the mind, and now it will no longer grow. And this is where you will then be able to stabilize the mind and you'll be able to perfect this restraint that the Buddha is talking about. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any and all questions that you like. So Samantha has a question here on Zoom. Where does preference fall in relationship to agreeable or disagreeable? Once one has eliminated cravings, will all things be equal? Can you have preference with non-attachment, as in given choices of food, will one still have a preference for an apple, but would also be content with offering of an orange, but one must decide on which one to eat? Yes, what you're describing there is what an individual who doesn't have craving will experience, that they don't see things as agreeable or disagreeable anymore, but they might have a certain preference. But the way that you get to that is that you've put the mind in the situation that it doesn't want to be in countless times. So let's just say the mind at one time had a craving for oranges and it doesn't like apples and it thinks apples are horrible. Well, you've gone through several situations where you've eaten apples and you can see the mind is completely content and completely peaceful. And now you've done that several times and you know that the mind completely is fine with apples and there's complete joy. You just see this food as nourishing the body. You're not forming your feelings based on the food. So now when there's an option, it's like apples and oranges. It's like, okay, well, I prefer to have an orange. I could be completely content with the apple. And you know that because you've tested the mind in multiple situations. But now, given the choice, you're choosing to have an orange. But you would be just as content, just as peaceful, just as joyful with the apple. And now that's a preference where there isn't a longing, yearning, and there isn't discontentedness when you're eating the apple, but instead the mind is just as peaceful and joyful eating either one. So that's a great example there, Samantha. And there's no longer agreeable or disagreeable by that point. And you've tested the mind in multiple situations. Vibhav is asking, can you please explain the 4 foundations of mindfulness that you reference? Yes, this is what the Buddha is teaching you, is essentially the life cycle that the mind is going to go through and what you're going to experience. Because of your cravings, desires, attachments, you're going to experience these 4 things. And what you need to be able to do is build awareness of these 4 things, because this is where you're going to transform the mind. The first foundation is called bodily sensations. This is the arising of bodily sensations whenever you have any contact through your 6 sense bases based on craving. If there's agreeable craving or agreeable contact based on your cravings, now the mind will arise pleasant feelings. And there's going to be some bodily sensation first before it becomes a feeling. There's going to be a bodily sensation. And then the same thing with painful feelings. If you have contact through the 6 sense bases, before the mind experiences the painful feeling, there's going to be some bodily sensation. And in the example of anger, it's like tightening of the chest, tightening of the throat, heat in the face, pressure in the skull, and things like this. So these bodily sensations that the mind needs to be aware of is in the moment when you're experiencing contact through the sense bases, you need to be aware of those bodily sensations, because what you would like to do is cut off and let go at that point. And that's essentially not allowing the mind to have the conditioned feeling. You're not suppressing the feelings, you're cutting it off before it becomes a feeling. Now, if you miss it as a bodily sensation, because as you're developing the 4 foundations of mindfulness and you're building in this restraint that the Buddha is talking about, you will miss it sometimes. And then ultimately it will become a feeling. And now the mind's experiencing the anger or the frustration. And at that point, you would also like to cut it off and let it go. And I teach you guys how to redirect the mind. Like if you're sitting there watching the news and you notice the bodily sensations associated with frustration arising, if you can internally cut it off and let it go there, you might need to redirect the mind, like get up and go to the bathroom, or get up and go outside and go for a walk or a bike ride or something like this. This is going to cut it off and let it go as a bodily sensation. But you can also do that as a feeling too. But as long as the mind keeps experiencing the conditioned feelings, you haven't caught it in time, and you'd like to get better and better at catching it as a bodily sensation. But if you miss it as a bodily sensation, because you will on your way that you haven't fully developed your mindfulness and your restraint, if it becomes a feeling, just cut it off and let it go there. You're shaving this wild bush back sooner and sooner and more. And if you miss it as a feeling, it's going to affect the condition of the mind. This is where, like multiple hours or days or weeks, you might have been agitated or grumpy or irritated. The general condition of the mind is experiencing agitation over a long-term period. And you can notice that, and you can have mindfulness of that. Like 3 hours you've been agitated and like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Snap out of this. Come on, let that thing go. You don't allow the mind to dwell in those condition of mind being agitated or annoyed or frustrated or some other conditioned experience. And then there's what's called mental objects. These are like the fetters, the deeply rooted containers in the mind that are polluting the mind and motivating unskillful conduct. So things like sensual desire itself is a mental object, or conceit. Conceit is the arrogance, the pride. That's not a feeling. That is being motivated. That's a mental state. That's a condition of the mind that is being motivated by this deeply rooted container of conceit. And you would like to understand the symptoms of these mental objects so that when they're arising, you can cut them off and let them go. And that's what this retreat, starting next Sunday, not tomorrow, but next Sunday, that I'm going to be doing, is I'm going to be walking students through over a 6-day period of helping you to understand each individual fetter. I'm going to be spending an hour to an hour and a half on each individual fetter, helping you understand what it is, the symptoms of it, how to eliminate it, and how to know that you've actually eliminated it. This is the deepest amount of content that I share on the actual fetters, is by spending an hour, hour and a half on each individual fetter. So you need to have awareness of these mental objects, but you first need to know what it is and what the symptoms of it are, so that when it's arising, you'll be able to spot it, and then you can take action to cut it off and let it go. So these are the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and more, you would like to catch it as a bodily sensation, because you ultimately need to purify the mind of all the mental objects of the 10 fetters, because when you're purifying the mind of the mental objects, that's what's actually going to produce enlightenment. So if you can get to the point where you're catching every single situation where discontentedness is starting to arise, and you can catch it as a bodily sensation and cut it off and let it go there, and it doesn't become a feeling, if you can get to this point, enlightenment is very close by. It's within about 1 year to 3 years. So right now, if you're not aware of these 4 foundations, you need to develop that. Then you need to get better and better at spotting it as a bodily sensation, realizing that it will become a feeling sometimes because your mind isn't fully developed. But ultimately, you're going to get to the point through your meditation, your generosity, practicing mindfulness in daily life, that you're catching every single situation that is occurring where the mind's starting to get discontent, and there's bodily sensations associated with it, and you can cut it off and let it go. And when you're doing that and you're living your life that way, in the next 1 to 3 years, you're going to be experiencing enlightenment. It's only a matter of time at that point. So this is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. You're welcome, Samantha. You're welcome, Vibhav. Pleased to help you guys. Okay, let's see if we have anything in Facebook or YouTube. Okay, I'm not seeing anything anywhere else. Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter, chapter 32. Looks like Yusuf is volunteering to read that. And then Mayuli, if you'd like to take the next one, we can come to you for the next one.
Hi, good evening. Dwelling in the breathing mindfulness meditation. Monks, that monk gains at will, without trouble or difficulty. That concentration through the development and cultivation of which no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind. And what concentration is it through the development and cultivation of which no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind? It is, monks, when concentration by mindfulness of breathing mindfulness meditation has been developed and cultivated, that no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind. And how, monks, is concentration by mindfulness of breathing mindfulness meditation developed and cultivated, so that no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind? Here, monks, a monk, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and set up mindfulness in front of him. Just mindful, he breathes in. Mindful, he breathes out. Breathing in long, he knows, I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he knows, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he knows, I breathe out short. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body, I will breathe out. He trains thus, calming the body sensations, I will breathe in. He trains thus, calming the bodily sensations. I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing joy. I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing joy. I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing peacefulness. I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing peacefulness. I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing the mental activity. I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the mental activity. I will breathe out. He trains thus, calming the mental activity. I will breathe in. He trains thus, calming the mental activity. I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing the mind. I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the mind. I will breathe out. He trains thus, gladdening the mind. I will breathe in. He trains thus, gladdening the mind. I will breathe out. He trains thus, concentrating the mind. I will breathe in. He trains thus, concentrating the mind. I will breathe out. He trains thus, liberating the mind. I will breathe in. He trains thus, liberating the mind. I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on impermanence. I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on impermanence. I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on fading away. I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on fading away. I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on elimination. I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on elimination. I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on letting go. I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on letting go. I will breathe out. It is, monks, when concentration by mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness meditation has been developed and cultivated in this way, that no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind. I too, monks, before my enlightenment, while I was still unawakened, but intent on awakening, not yet fully enlightened, generally dwelt in this dwelling. While I generally dwelt in this dwelling, neither my body nor my eyes become fatigued, and my mind, by not clinging, was liberated from the taints. Therefore, monks, if a monk aspires, may neither my body nor my eyes become fatigued, and may my mind, by not clinging, be liberated from taints. This same concentration by mindfulness of breathing mindfulness meditation, should be closely attained to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So here the Buddha is describing how he spent a significant amount of time doing breathing mindfulness meditation, and this is what led to his enlightenment. And that's why he taught it, because he knows it worked for him, so it's going to work for others. When you guys learn in the foundational program the Eightfold Path with me, and we got to the point of right concentration in the Eightfold Path, I mentioned to you, this is describing in the Eightfold Path the jhanas and the results of putting together the Eightfold Path, the 4 preliminary phases that the mind goes through before it experiences the first stage of enlightenment. And then I mentioned to you that the Buddha teaches right concentration and other parts of his teachings that plug into the Eightfold Path. And this is one of those places where he's talking about right concentration and how to develop concentration. Breathing mindfulness meditation is how you develop right concentration, and then practicing singleness of mind, doing just one thing at a time. This is what I teach in all the foundational programs when we teach the Eightfold Path. And this is one of those places out of many where he's teaching about how to develop concentration. He's talking here about meditation and the cultivation of this concentration, because that's what's ultimately going to help you develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness. These chapters are in a particular order for a reason, because in the previous chapter, you're learning about the importance of developing awareness of the bodily sensations. And now here, this chapter, the Buddha is describing to you exactly how to develop those 4 foundations of mindfulness, that it's through your meditation. And there's other chapters where he breaks it down even in more detail than this. So here, he's helping you to understand that you're going to need to practice breathing mindfulness meditation to develop that concentration, so that your mind is so focused and so refined that you're aware of those bodily sensations as they're arising when you experience the contact through the 6 sense bases. And you can ultimately get to a point where there's no shaking or trembling in the body or the mind, because an unenlightened mind with craving, desire, attachment is going to be shaken up, right? This is the anxiety, the stress, the frustration, everything shaken up. But if you'd like to get to a point where the mind's stable and steady, where the mind is enlightened, that's what you're going to need to develop, is this concentration through the breathing mindfulness meditation. And the Buddha is explaining that all the way through. And he ultimately gets to a point where he's starting to explain meditation. And this is what I do when I explain meditation, and I do it in a consolidated form where I talk about crossing your legs if you're in the seated position. I talk about straightening up the body and being erect, because this brings some attentiveness and alertness to the mind. I talk about setting up mindfulness in front of you. We do that through the chanting, where you're starting to develop awareness of mind. And then you start establishing the breath, right? You just start having this awareness of the breath. And then knowing if you breathe in long or short is essentially focusing the mind on the breath, bringing your attention of the mind and fixating it on the breath. That it's not about you should breathe long or you should breathe short. It's about if you're breathing long, that means your mind knows that because your mind is now focused on the breath. Or if you're breathing short, your mind knows that because it's now focused on the breath. And then the Buddha goes through the development of meditation. This is essentially the Buddha giving guidance during meditation. He's not saying that you should keep all these phrases in mind as you're meditating, but he's explaining to you what you should do. Essentially, like if you were a young child learning how to brush your teeth, your parents needed to say, okay, put the toothpaste on the toothbrush, run it under the water, put it into your mouth, and now go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then they're teaching you how to brush your teeth step by step by step. But then ultimately, when you get very proficient at brushing your teeth, you don't have to think about all those steps anymore. You just do it. You just boom, 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 and now you can do it. But when you're first getting started, this is the Buddha giving you guidance during meditation. And I've consolidated that in the breathing mindfulness meditation that I share. And he's explaining to you step by step about the things that the mind should be doing. So that when you're experiencing the whole body, meaning you have awareness of the whole body, when you notice bodily sensations arising during your meditation, you would like to calm those by cutting off and letting go and bringing the mind back to the breath. And as you're doing that and you're training your mind to let go of craving and clinging, the mind starts experiencing this joy and peacefulness during the meditation. As you're noticing this mental activity where the mind's having all these erroneous thoughts, you would like to cut that off and let it go and bring the mind back to the breath, calming the mind. There's another discourse where the Buddha specifically talks about cutting off and letting go. Here he's using the word calming the mental activity, but in other parts he talks about cutting off and bringing the mind back to the breath. And then as you're noticing mental activity and you're cutting off and bringing the mind back to the breath, you're experiencing the full mind. You're starting to notice more and more and be aware of the full mind. And then where you're noticing the mind is sad or grumpy or irritated, you would like to gladden it. You'd like to brighten it up and lift it up. You'd like to concentrate the mind, focusing it on that breath. And whenever it moves off the breath, bring the mind back to the breath. And this is where the mind starts to become liberated or free, that it's no longer bound up by this craving, desire, attachment and carrying around the burden of cravings, desires, attachments. As these things are happening in meditation, you need to remind yourself occasionally that these things are impermanent. If you see a certain thought arising and the mind wants to hold on to it, remind yourself that it's impermanent. Or if you have a certain feeling that comes up, remind your mind that, hey, this is impermanent, so that then it will slowly fade away and you will have eliminated your discontentedness and the mind can fully let go. That's what the mind's ultimately working towards with breathing mindfulness meditation, to be able to let go, let go, let go. But it will have thoughts during meditation, even when the mind's enlightened. So then the Buddha talks about this concentration that is developed and get the mind very stable and steady. Then he's describing how while he was meditating and he was making his way to enlightenment, he didn't notice any fatigue of the body or of the eyes. Because when you're carrying around craving, desire, attachment, this is like a burden. You feel heavy weights on your shoulders. You feel maybe heavy weights on your feet. And you come home at the end of the day and you just feel so bogged down and so exhausted. This is because the mind's craving, and you go out into the world and you're not getting what you want. So the mind feels exhausted because it was trying so hard and longing, yearning, was trying to pull and pull and pull like those animals. And it just gets so exhausted. So by the time you're training your mind and your mind's not pulling anymore, an enlightened being doesn't experience exhaustion or tiredness. They get sleepy where they need to sleep, but they don't get exhausted. They have sustainable energy all day long. So if you notice at the end of the day, your eyes are really tired or the body is really tired or exhausted, this is just because the mind's craving. Because if you're out in the world craving and craving and craving and carrying around this burden, you'll get to the end of your day, maybe you've gotten a lot of your cravings fulfilled, and you're like, this was such a great day, because the mind got all its cravings fulfilled, or a lot of them. But if you get to the end of your day and your cravings haven't been getting fulfilled, this was a hectic day. This was like the worst day ever, right? That's because of the mind's craving, desire, attachment. But when you clear all that away, every day is a wonderful day, right? Essentially, that's what the Buddha is saying. He's saying, hey, if you're interested in getting to this liberation of mind, where the mind's been liberated from the taints, where the mind's been eliminated the pollutions, where those fetters are completely eliminated. That's what the taints are, the defilements or the fetters. When those are eliminated from the mind is liberated. It's free from those strong feelings, and you're not going to experience this exhaustion. So the Buddha, being very diplomatic the way that he is, instead of trying to force or coerce somebody into doing something, he just says, hey, if you aspire to getting to this same exact mental state that he's experiencing, here's how to do it. Develop mindfulness of breathing, or breathing mindfulness meditation. You should develop this as part of your practice. So this is what the Buddha is explaining here. Let me know if you guys have questions here. You guys know to put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom. Okay, Yusuf, go ahead, sir.
One of the things that the Buddha said is to reflect on impermanence while meditating. So sometimes a thought come up, then after a discontent thought, then after that bodily sensation, feelings, and my whole mind becomes discontent. When I try to think about those, that I am not those, they will fade, they will change. I remember you saying that you don't need to try to look from where they come from or to say anything, just cut them off and let them go. But I am not able to cut them off and let them go. But when I try to figure out or say they are impermanent or something, I am able to cut them off and let them go. So should I do this or that here?
Yeah, this is what you're doing as you're first getting going with your training, that when you're in meditation or in daily life where things are coming up, you can remind yourself that these things are impermanent, and that helps the mind to let go. So what I might have been saying to you in that conversation is that ultimately, by the time you get to enlightenment and later in your development, you're not going to have to remind yourself that these things are impermanent. You would be able to just cut them off and let them go. But in the process of getting there, you're going to need to remind the mind occasionally that, hey, this is impermanent. And you can use that in order to train the mind to let go. And it also helps to redirect the mind as well. So I did this for a good 3 to 6 months initially during the meditation and in daily life, where I needed to remind the mind every once in a while that, yes, this is impermanent. You can let it go. And then that helped the mind to let it go.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, Vibhav, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, David. I had actually 2 questions. So one, can you please talk about the other texts that talk about like kasina meditation, where like objects of meditation more than just breath? I mean, I'm not sure if there's any text in the suttas itself that talks about that, or that's in late edition. And the second part, I think I did ask this question before, but maybe if you can a little bit go more deeper into the differences between the two, I guess, what people are following these days are different between the samatha and vipassana, which is obviously not in the suttas, but my assumption is that the development of insight is basically a effect of doing the breathing mindful meditation. So if you can just please give us thoughts on that as well. Thank you.
Sure. Was your first question, are there other objects to focus on besides the breath? Is that your first question?
Yeah, so they're talking about kasina objects like fire or water or other, or like looking at candles and stuff like that.
Okay, so the Buddha never taught those kinds of things, and you'll see people that are doing these kinds of things out in the world because the teachings have been modified over time. And what you would like to do is get closer and closer and closer to what the Buddha did. The closer you get to what the Buddha did to get to enlightenment, that's what's going to actually produce your enlightenment. Any of these changes and modifications that have happened over the years, it's actually in a lot of cases just going to hinder you from getting to enlightenment. And the Buddha warned people and advised people not to change his teachings, but not everybody studies his teachings in order to know that. And sometimes if they're studying with a certain teacher and they just have admiration and respect for this person, and they're not necessarily studying the suttas or the discourses, they're just believing what the teacher said. Slowly but surely, over 2,500 years, a lot of people have changed and modified his teachings. So by going back to the original discourses like this, by studying with the original words of the Buddha, you don't have to believe anything. You can learn, you can investigate, you can reflect on it, and then you can practice it and see the truth for yourself. So I don't recommend focusing on any other thing during breathing mindfulness meditation other than the breath. This is why it's called breathing mindfulness meditation or mindfulness of breathing, because you like to focus on the breath, and that should be the object of meditation. And then similar answer for the samatha versus vipassana. You will never see anywhere in the teachings of the Buddha where he talks about samatha or vipassana meditation. These are things that people came up with after his death. The different people have different perspectives on what these things are. The way that I've heard people talk about samatha meditation, and I've heard people talk about it in multiple ways, is they talk about it as calming meditation, and they talk about vipassana meditation as developing awareness of the body and insight meditation. So I can understand what people are trying to accomplish in these things, but remember, there's only 4 meditations that the Buddha taught: breathing mindfulness meditation, loving kindness meditation, elimination of sexual cravings, and meditation to eliminate the personal existence view. And those are the only 4 that you need. So as people go about all these retreats, they're learning all these different things. And it appears that in Vipassana meditation, one of the things they're developing is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And this is why they're doing those kinds of things. And they actually do a little bit of breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation in those retreats too. And it appears that they're trying to develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness through this body scanning. But you won't see anywhere in the Pali Canon where the Buddha is talking about body scanning. But you will see that he's talking about the development of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So if you're learning what I'm sharing with you, which doesn't involve samatha and vipassana meditation, this is what will lead to your enlightenment. But you're going to see other people out there teaching different things, but you won't see that in the discourses of the Buddha, and you won't see that those things are required in order to get to enlightenment. There's only 2 meditations that you need in order to truly get to enlightenment, which is breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation, because they address craving and they address anger, right? Those are the 2 of the 3 poisons. And then the 3rd one is addressed by cultivation of wisdom. And these other 2 meditations, a meditation to eliminate sexual cravings and eliminate the personal existence view to realize non-self, those are specialized meditations that some people will need, but not everybody will need those. So if you focus on breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation, you can penetrate into these very deeply and get very good at them, really deep into them, so that you can essentially master them and get to become to the point where your mind is fully developed with both of these. Whereas if you tried to learn just say, 10, 15, 20 different meditations, those things oftentimes aren't taking the mind in the direction that it needs in order to get to enlightenment, but also a person spreads so thin that they're not getting really deep into understanding how to do those individual meditations. So while you'll see other people talking about other things, it's important for you to be able to see what the Buddha taught, because that's what's going to actually lead to your enlightenment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think Brent had his hand up, but I don't see it any longer, or maybe we answered his question. So Brent, if you still have questions, you're welcome to let me know. Okay, let me check Facebook and YouTube. All right, so I don't see any questions. So looks like Mayu Lee, you're up for this next one. Let me see something here, because what we've got here is something very similar to what we have read. Okay, so yeah, what we're actually seeing here is this is another discourse which is very similar to the last one. So Mayuli, what I'll have you do is just read this first paragraph, and then we'll skip over all this other stuff because we've already read that. And then we're going to skip all the way down here to where the Buddha picks it up down here, because no need to read through all those directions again, because we've already studied those as part of this particular class. So let me find Mayuli so that you can unmute yourself. There you go, ma'am.
Breathing mindfulness meditation, the Tathagata's dwelling. Monks, if wanderers of other communities ask you, in what dwelling, friends, did the perfectly enlightened one generally dwell in during the rain retreat? Being asked this, thus. You should answer those wonders thus. During the rain's residence, friends, the perfectly enlightened one generally dwelt in the concentration by mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness meditation. If anyone, monks, speaking rightly, could say of anything, it is a noble dwelling, an excellent dwelling, the Tathagata's dwelling. It is of concentration by mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness meditation, that one could rightly say this. Monks, those monks who are trainees, who have not trained their minds ideal, who dwell aspiring for the unsurpassed security from bondage, enlightenment, of them concentrations by mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness meditation, when developed and cultivated, leads to the destructions of the taints. Those monks who are arahant, those whose taints are destroyed, who have lived the holy life, done what has been done, laid down the burden, reached their own goal, completely destroyed the fetters of existence. Those completely liberated through final knowledge, wisdom. For them, concentrations by mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness meditation, when developed and cultivated, leads to a peaceful dwelling in this very life and to mindfulness and clear comprehension. If anyone, monks, speaking rightly, could say of anything, it is noble dwelling, an excellent dwelling, the Tathagata's dwelling. It is of concentration by mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness meditation, that one could rightly say this.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So what the Buddha is talking about here is developing concentration with the breathing mindfulness meditation. That's how you develop right concentration. And he's saying, hey, I practice this extensively, and so do all the other arahants, all the other enlightened beings that got to enlightenment and their minds fully liberated. They practice breathing mindfulness meditation too. So if you're looking to develop this mindfulness, which is what you're going to need in order to get to enlightenment, in clear comprehension, whenever he's talking about clear comprehension, that's concentration or clarity of mind. He's saying, hey, if that's what you would like to develop, then it's breathing mindfulness meditation that you're going to need in order to be able to do that and accomplish that. And of course, in that middle section that we didn't read, it's the same thing from before, essentially, where he's just guiding you in how to do breathing mindfulness meditation. So any questions on this chapter? Okay. All right. Oh, okay, I see Brent there. All right, I don't see any other questions. So it looks like Brent would like to read this next chapter. So chapter 34. Let's see. Yeah, okay. And I just need to find you here, Brent. When you guys electronically raise your hand, it pops you up to the front. There you are, Brent.
One who develops mindfulness of death diligently for the destruction of the taints. Monks, mindfulness of death, when developed and cultivated, is of great fruit and benefit, culminating in the deathless enlightenment, having the deathless as its conclusion. But do you, monks, develop mindfulness of death? When this was said, one monk said to the perfectly enlightened one, Venerable Sir, I develop mindfulness of death. Monks, the monk who develops mindfulness of death thus, may I live just a night and a day so that I may attend to the perfectly enlightened one's teaching. I could then accomplish much. May I live just a day so that I may attend to the perfectly enlightened one's teaching. I could then accomplish much. May I live just half a day so that I may attend to the perfectly enlightened one's teaching. I could then accomplish much. May I live just the length of time it takes to eat a single almsful meal, so that I may attend the perfectly enlightened one's teaching. I could then accomplish much. May I live just the length of time it takes to eat half an alms food meal, so that I may attend to the perfectly enlightened one's teaching. I could then accomplish much. May I live just the length of time it takes to chew and swallow 4 or 5 mouthfuls of food, so that I may attend to the perfectly enlightened one's teaching. I could then accomplish much. These are called monks who dwell carelessly. They develop mindfulness of death sluggishly for the destruction of the taints. But the monk who develops mindfulness of death thus, may I live just the length of time it takes to chew and swallow a single mouthful of food so that I may attend to the perfectly enlightened one's teaching. I could then accomplish much. May I live just the length of time it takes to breathe out and after breathing in, or to breathe in after breathing out, so that I may attend to the perfectly enlightened one's teaching. I could then accomplish much. These are called monks who reside determined. They develop mindfulness of death diligently for the destruction of the taints. Therefore, monks, you should train yourselves thus. We will reside determined. We will develop mindfulness of death diligently for the destruction of the taints. Thus should you train yourselves.
Okay, thank you, Brent. So there's two things that are happening here. Is the Buddha is talking about this mindfulness of death, also described as reflection of death or contemplation of death. This is a technique that you can use to get comfortable with your own death and eliminate any kind of fear of holding on to this life and holding on to existence. And also it helps you to eliminate any fear or discontentedness associated with other people's death or breaking any kind of attachment to individuals in the relationship. So this is where you envision that someone has died or that you've died, and now you play that out in the mind. This is reflection on death or contemplation of death or awareness of death and mindfulness of death. And the Buddha is saying this is something that you can practice in order to essentially eliminate the fetters and eliminate the pollutions of mind. And he's also talking about how to arise diligence and dedication and determination in your practice. And he's essentially saying, hey, think about it as if, you only have this limited period of time to actually learn and practice the teachings. Where oftentimes we sit back in our 20s and our 30s, maybe even our 40s, and just like, we're just out here with all this sensual desire, fulfilling all of those cravings. And it's not until much later that we realize, oh my goodness, I need to do something to train this mind because things aren't going well in my life. Well, if you think about okay, this body is going to be dying and I need to get going with this and be dedicated and diligent. Now the Buddha is giving you this analogy about, how much time you have in order to actually learn and practice the teachings. And if you keep in mind that, okay, I'm going to be able to maybe live for the next in-breath and out-breath, then I should attend to these teachings. And meaning hey, I don't really have that much time here. So let me be diligent. Let me be on the ball. Let me not be complacent. And that's what the Buddha is talking about here. So any questions on this particular chapter from anybody? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll go to the next one, which is chapter 35. Looks like Yusuf has his hand up. Go ahead, sir.
Direct knowledge for a sick one. Monks, if 5 things do not slip away from a weak and sick monk, it can be predicted of him in no long time with the destruction of the taints. He will realize for himself with direct knowledge, experience in this very life, the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he will reside in it. What 5? Here, a monk resides reflecting on unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, receiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. If these 5 things do not slip away from a weak and sick monk, it can be predicted of him in no long time with the destruction of taints. He will realize for himself with direct knowledge, experience in this very life, the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he will reside in it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So the Buddha is talking about how to get to experience to the point where you're practicing even when you're sick. Because when this body is sick, your practice will have a tendency to slip if you're not on top of your game, right? Like your mind, when it's experiencing the impermanence of the body, that now the body's not healthy, you can easily become grumpy or irritable. You can become unskillful in your intention, speech, and actions. And that's all going to produce unwholesome karma, right? The natural law of karma doesn't get paused just because you're sick. So even when you're sick, you would like to be attentive to the mind and be practicing the teachings. And the Buddha is talking about these 5 things that would be wise to keep in mind even when you're sick, so that way you can continue to develop your practice. He's talking about the unattractiveness of the body, that's where you develop this understanding that the body is unattractive. And while you might see that, yes, this person is beautiful or this person is handsome, you don't have a longing, yearning for it. Because what we see is we see the hair, the jewelry, we see the clothing, we see the muscles and the skin, we see this outer layer, and wow, we might be attracted to it and think like, wow, let me long and yearn for that. That's going to give me some pleasure. But when we can develop the unattractiveness of the body, like envisioning like as if the skin is ripped off this person, or doing the meditation to eliminate the craving for sexual contact and sexual cravings, this can help you develop this unattractiveness of the body. And it doesn't mean that you're repulsed by the body. It's just that you no longer see it attractive. Because when we think about the pus and the mucus and the saliva and the urine and the feces and all these things, now we're starting to see true reality of the body. And then we might see this as something that's unattractive. And you would like to be able to develop this throughout your life so that your mind can get to the point where you ultimately eliminate sexual cravings. And that's what's going to take you to enlightenment. Of course, you can hang out in the second stage of enlightenment for as long as you like. And there you might be still having sexual contact in your relationship. But ultimately, if you'd like to get to the permanent peace and the permanent joy, that's where the mind fully eliminates sensual desire. And one of the ways to do that is develop an attractiveness of the body, because one of the strongest sensual desires that some people often have is the craving for sexual pleasure and sexual contact. So this is the way that you would do that. Perceiving the dissatisfaction of food. This isn't that you don't enjoy the food. It's to understand that this food isn't going to provide lasting satisfaction, that the only purpose of this food is to nourish the health of the body and sustain the body. This is what the Buddha talks about in other discourses. So you'll get to a point where you're enjoying that piece of chocolate cake and you know it tastes good, but you're not craving and clinging to it, so that if you come back the next day and the restaurant doesn't have that cake, then you can be completely content with that. And that's where, like we were talking about preferences, you might prefer to have a piece of chocolate cake today, but the fact that there is no chocolate cake, that's completely fine too, no worries. So you get to that by accomplishing the point where you get to the point that your mind understands that this food is just to nourish the health of the body and sustain the body. And you understand that this food isn't going to provide lasting satisfaction. It's not going to be permanent, and that you can't latch onto this and crave because it's not going to provide permanent happiness. Perceiving non-excitement in the entire world is to not have conditioned pleasant feelings based on things in the world. That maybe you see the Olympics are on. It's like, wow, I'm so excited. Yay, the Olympics. But then when they're over, oh, I'm so sad, right? So if you allow the mind to get excited about things that are going on in the world, now when things aren't going well in the world, like maybe there's a war or something like that, you'll be frustrated and agitated. So you'd like to not allow the mind to have conditioned pleasant feelings based on things that are going on in the world. Then, of course, the thing that the Buddha teaches from the very beginning of the path is making sure you understand and deeply penetrate into the mind and soak into the mind the perception of impermanence, understanding that all conditioned objects are impermanent. And this is where you can see that the Buddha didn't teach everything is impermanent. He taught everything in the world is impermanent. All conditioned objects are impermanent. Anything you can see, hear, smell, any taste or flavors, any physical objects that come in contact with the body, and any mental objects, any thoughts or ideas that go through the mind, these are all conditioned objects and they are impermanent. But enlightenment itself is permanent. The natural laws of existence are permanent. These are unconditioned objects, but understanding conditioned objects are impermanent is something you're going to need to deeply penetrate into the mind. And then develop the perception of death, understanding that this body is going to die and other people are going to die too, and being completely comfortable with that, because oftentimes people are very uncomfortable with death. So you're going to need to develop the perception of death and understanding that this is a normal occurrence and there's no need to have certain feelings about death. It's just the process of life and its impermanence, and there's nothing you can do to change it. Those things that arise, they're going to change and they're going to fade away, including this body and everybody else's body. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Vibhab, you have questions, or is that to read the next chapter?
Both, actually.
Oh, okay, sure.
So I had two questions again, sorry, on this. One is on the dissatisfaction of food. And we've talked about chocolate cake, and Buddha had talked about food, not having food as an amusement. And so it seems to me that things like any kind of dessert, like chocolate cake or, anything sweet, all those kind of things are mostly eaten for amusement, not for nourishing the body. So is it still okay to, I guess you're saying it's okay to eat chocolate cake, but you're still eating it not for nourishment, you're eating because you like it, right? Even though it's not really conditional, and if you don't get it, you're okay with it, but you're still eating chocolate cake for amusement, not for body nourishment.
Yeah, it's not whether you're eating the chocolate cake or not. It's what the mind's doing through eating the chocolate cake. It's how the mind's relating to this. So you can eat chocolate cake. There's no harm in eating chocolate cake. You haven't caused any harm to any being. But if your mind experiences conditional pleasant feelings from it, you're going to need to distance yourself from it from a period of time and train your mind to let go of that craving, desire, attachment. But then ultimately, when you let go of the craving, desire, attachment, you can start eating chocolate cake and be just fine with it. And you can enjoy it, because when you're eating good food, like let's just say the normal food that you eat on a day-to-day basis, you can tell like, wow, this food is really good. It tastes really nice. But then the next day you're eating food and it's like, oh, this food doesn't taste as good, but hey, I'm just going to still eat it because it nourishes the body. Where we'll oftentimes be repulsed when there's craving, desire, attachments in the mind, and you don't have this perception of dissatisfaction of food, where you understand that it's not this food that's going to lead to permanent satisfaction in the mind. So you need to get to the point where you can eat food A, you can eat food B, you can eat food C, and obviously these things all taste different, and you're completely comfortable and content with that. And your mind is not looking at food as agreeable and disagreeable, it's just food. And chocolate cake, while it is typically something that is enjoyable and it tastes nice, you don't have to form conditioned feelings about this. So it's not about whether you do eat the chocolate cake or not eat the chocolate cake. It's ensuring that you're not having craving and clinging in this experience, so that when you have the chocolate cake, you're so happy, and when you don't have it, you'll be frustrated. You can get rid of that and learn how to enjoy it without having conditioned feelings. And this is what you're doing with all aspects of life. Let's just say that you enjoy playing basketball, but say when you're unenlightened and you have craving, desire, attachment, the day that you play basketball, you feel so excited and you feel so happy and you go around all day in this bright mood. But then the next day you can't play basketball, you'll feel frustrated and agitated or grumpy or irritable. This is because of the mind's craving to play basketball, where you need to get to the point where you enjoy playing the basketball and you can feel completely wonderful playing basketball. But when you don't play basketball, you can feel completely fine and wonderful there too. And you'd like to be able to train your mind to do that, not just with chocolate cake, but with every aspect of your life, is learning how to enjoy something and then be done with it. Where the mind doesn't understand how to do this when there's craving, desire, attachment, because it's chasing after those pleasant feelings.
No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the other question that kind of came in my mind in the morning was around the impermanence. So we're talking about impermanence of all conditioned objects. Does that include things we perceived as permanent in the world today? Like, mathematics, I'm just taking an example of mathematical formulas, or where we say, there's some constants in the world, like the value of pi is 3.14159, blah blah blah. Are these permanent in the context of the world we live in and as it exists, and when the world is destroyed at some point of time, they will also cease to exist, or exist, or is it how we perceive these constants, like how the world runs today? It's not what I'm trying to say, or does that make sense?
Yeah, you can see something like mathematics actually is not permanent, because we're actually developing new formulas and new things all the time, and we're constantly adding to this body of knowledge. So there you can see that it's not permanent in that situation. So the mind might perceive it as permanent, but you need to be able to reflect on the impermanent nature of this thing and realize, like, this body of knowledge about mathematics is constantly changing, just like everything else around you, that you would like to be able to see it as a conditioned object, that it arises, it changes, and it fades away. And yes, one day when the earth is no longer in existence and we don't have mathematics here anymore and there is no humanity, then there isn't going to be mathematics there because there's no humanity to understand it. So from that standpoint, it's also impermanent.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, so I don't see any questions anywhere on Facebook or YouTube. So Vibhav, if you would like to read this next chapter, you're welcome to. You guys can see all this content here that I'm sharing related to each one of these chapters. So this is why it's important that you be sure you take some time to read the book, because I'm not teaching to the same level of detail in the class, and you're going to glean a lot more benefit if you're reading the books. So if you'd like to read this next one, chapter 36, go ahead, sir. You need to be unmuted. Go ahead, sir.
There is no you there. Then, Bhaiya, when for you there will be only the seen in reference to the seen, only the heard in reference to the heard, only the sensed in reference to the sensed, only the recognized in reference to the recognized. Then, Bhaiya, there is no you in connection with that. When there is no you in connection with that, there is no you there. When there is no you there, you are neither here nor there, nor between the two. Just this is the end of stress.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So there's a couple of things that you can glean from this. For those of you guys that have been studying with me, you probably already know that what the Buddha is talking about here is the elimination of personal existence view and realizing non-self, the universal truth of non-self. And what he's saying is that there's no you there. There is no you there. That there's only the seen in reference to the seen. There's only the heard in reference to the heard. And there's only the sensed in reference to the sensed. This is where we oftentimes add the story into it, right? So that when somebody says something to you and they say, oh, you're so beautiful, or oh, you're so ugly, or whatever someone might say, you're adding the you in there. And there's a you here. And because of that you, now you experience discontentedness. And the Buddha is saying, no, there is no you there. It's just this physical body. It's just, this physical form. It's just the mind. He's not saying those types of things here, but he says it in other places. But he's essentially alluding to it here, that there is no you there. It's just a physical body. It's just structures. It's just the mind. That's all it is. But with the mind adding in the you, now you're going to be frustrated. Like they are disrespecting me, where somebody can't disrespect me because there's no me here, right? When there's no me here and somebody's being disrespectful, okay, they're choosing to be disrespectful. And that's the choice that they're making. And that's what I hear out of their voice. But it's just the heard. It's not that they're disrespecting me because there's no me here. So when there's only the heard in reference to the heard, then it's only the voice. It's only sounds that I'm hearing. They're not disrespecting me because there's no me here. There's no you there. There's no you in connection with that. That's what the Buddha is helping you to be able to see and understand. So that if you can get more and more in tune with this, that when somebody's doing something or somebody's referencing something related to this physical body or the mind, that you don't insert the you so that then you can become discontent. Because if there's a you there, the mind's going to become discontent. But if you get the you out of the way, that there's no you. It's just sounds that are coming from someone's mouth. And yeah, okay, that's unskillful speech, and I wouldn't choose to do that, but this person is choosing to do that, and that's impermanence, that they're just choosing to do that, and it's going to affect them. But I'm not going to allow it to affect me because there's no me here. It's just hearing things. It's just the heard in reference to the heard. And that's what he's basically saying here, that there's no you there. It's really important to remind yourself of that. That when you're noticing that your mind is getting upset and frustrated based on personal existence view, just remind yourself there's no you there. But as long as the mind has this confusion or misunderstanding that there is a you, that's where you'll get discontent. So the Buddha is saying, okay, when you can get to this point where you've realized non-self, there's no you there. You're neither here nor there, neither between the two. And this he's saying, okay, this is the end of stress. Essentially saying this is the end of discontentedness related to personal existence view. You will never again experience any discontentedness related to somebody saying that you're ugly or saying that you're handsome or beautiful or saying that you're fat or, they don't like your hair, they don't like your clothes or whatever it is, you'll just smile because you'll know that none of this stuff is you, right? So that's the end of stress. That's the end of discontentedness related to this personal existence view. When you finally realize non-self, that there is no you there. And of course, that's gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. Looks like Brent either has a question or would like to volunteer. Go ahead, sir.
Both, actually. When did you say that class you were going to do on the 10 fetters is? An hour and a half on each one?
It's going to be from August 18th until the 23rd. So it's starting next Sunday at 3 p.m. Thai time. So for you, that would be pretty early in the morning, I think, if I remember your time zone. But all of these classes are going to be recorded on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch them at your own leisure. So I'll be live streaming in YouTube the whole time, and there's going to be Zoom. So it's going to be on Facebook, YouTube, and there's Zoom accessible too. So it's going to be starting at Sunday from 3 to 5. Then each day, Monday through Thursday, it's going to be 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. and then 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And then on Friday, we're going to go from 9 a.m. until about 4:30 p.m. So you might actually be able to attend some of these live, and then some of them you might need to watch through the recordings.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yusuf, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a curious question about this topic. You said before, as I remember, that if someone is in the first stage of enlightenment, he should eliminate his personal existence view, right?
He would have already eliminated it by the time he got to the first stage of enlightenment.
Yeah, so if someone slaps him in in front of a crowded people, will he have discontentedness related to the self-image? That would be okay for him.
No, by the time you've eliminated personal existence view, there won't be any discontentedness. If you're in a large crowd and somebody disparages this body or the mind, you won't get upset or discontent in that situation.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome. No embarrassment or anything like that. Okay, so let's see. Oh, sure, Mayuli. Okay, all right. So Brent, if you would like to read this next chapter, you can go ahead. This is chapter 37.
With the elimination of excitement comes the complete destruction of discontentedness. Puna, there are forms recognizable by the eye that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, excitement is eliminated in him. With the elimination of excitement, Puna, there is the elimination of discontentedness, I say. There are, Puna, sounds recognizable by the ear, odors recognizable by the nose, flavors recognizable by the tongue, physical objects recognizable by the body, mental objects recognizable by the mind that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, excitement is eliminated in him. With the elimination of excitement, Puna, there is the elimination of discontentedness, I say.
Okay, thank you, Brent. So here, this is the Buddha reminding you not to allow the mind to get conditioned pleasant feelings and to cut them off and let them go, essentially is what he's teaching in his other teachings. But here he's saying, hey, with the elimination of these conditioned pleasant feelings, all discontentedness will be eliminated. This is what I was saying earlier when I was saying there's no secrets on the path to enlightenment. But if there's one real penetrating thing that your mind needs to really clue into, is seeing these pleasant feelings that are conditional just as much of a problem as the painful ones, because you will never get rid of the painful feelings as long as you don't eliminate the conditioned pleasant feelings. And remember, by the time you get to enlightenment, you're just always happy. You're always experiencing joy because it's unconditioned joy, unconditioned happiness. But if you allow the mind to get the conditional happiness or conditional excitement, which is what the Buddha is describing here, then the painful feelings are waiting for you. Because if you get so excited that you got that brand new job, at some point your craving, desire, attachment is going to not be getting fulfilled. And now you're disgruntled or agitated or frustrated about this job, that either you lost it or the company went out of business, or maybe just you're still working the job, but you don't like it anymore because the conditions changed, where initially there were certain conditions that were arising that excitement. Same thing if you allow the mind to get excited about that chocolate cake, since we're talking about chocolate cake. If you allow that to occur, when you go into the restaurant and they don't have your chocolate cake, you'll be frustrated. So if you're interested in getting rid of the painful feelings, which is the built-in motivation that the mind has, you need to be able to see the conditioned pleasant feelings as just as much of a problem, and understanding to let go of those conditional pleasant feelings. Because this isn't as intuitive, because in the unenlightened state, we chase after those pleasant feelings. We think that that's what life's all about. Let me crave and desire and chase after these conditioned pleasant feelings. And when you get what you want, the mind gets this pleasant feeling and it kind of reinforces that the chase was worthwhile. But you feel that pleasant feeling for whatever period of time, maybe a couple of minutes or a couple of hours or a couple of days. Or in the case of a job, say you enjoy this job for 3 years or 5 years, and then ultimately the company goes out of business and now you're angry and frustrated. You're not relating those painful feelings that you experienced 3 to 5 years later to the fact that you had excitement 3 to 5 years prior. So you need to be able to see this connection. And that's what a Buddha is doing for you, is being able to help you to see this connection between the conditional pleasant feelings and painful feelings. You need to be willing to let go of these temporary pleasant feelings in order to get to the permanent happiness and the permanent joy. You'll never eliminate your frustration and all those other painful feelings if you're not cutting off and letting go of the conditional pleasant feelings. And that's what the Buddha is helping you to be able to see here. So any questions on this chapter? Okay, looks like Yihang has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. I was just thinking when you were talking about when people's having conditioned pleasant feeling and they will have the conditioned unpleasant feeling, it's somehow not combined, but like related sort of together. Then I was like a bit curious when we talk about the cycle of rebirth, why would some realms beings are only be able to feel unpleasant feeling without pleasant feeling, and some realms beings are only feeling pleasant feeling without feeling unpleasant feeling?
Sure. This is just the nature of the existence in that particular realm, that the quality of the mind, that it's incapable, like for example, the heavenly realm, it's incapable of experiencing the painful feelings. It only experiences pleasant feelings. Or like in the hell realm, they only experience painful feelings. They don't experience pleasant feelings. But here in the human realm, we're capable of experiencing all three feelings. So now that you're in the human realm and you have this ability to get to enlightenment, you need to be able to understand the conditional pleasant feelings are just as much of a problem, in that then they're going to produce the painful ones. But in other realms, they don't have the same qualities of mind. In the animal realm, they do experience all three feelings, but they don't have the capability to understand the teachings to the level of a human. They experience pleasant, painful, and neither painful nor pleasant. But in these other realms, they experience a variation of those things, because that's just the nature of existence in those particular realms.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Vibhav, you have a question?
Yeah, so just to follow up on what Ihan was saying, in the heavenly realm, do the beings there still feel like conditional? I mean, what would conditional happen? Because what would like make them come out of the heavenly realm back into the human realm because they're not reached enlightenment? Or what is preventing them from reaching enlightenment in the heavenly realm?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's craving, and they're also experiencing ignorance or unknowing of true reality. They don't have anger there, but they're still experiencing craving, and they're still experiencing ignorance or unknowing of true reality. And because of those cravings, they're experiencing those conditioned pleasant feelings. And now craving, not only does it cause conditional feelings, it also is the cause of rebirth. And because they're experiencing such pleasantness in the heavenly realm, they oftentimes lack motivation to eliminate their cravings, desires, attachments. And this is why going to the heavenly realm is not ideal. It's not a permanent existence. And those beings will oftentimes reborn into other realms. They can even go down to the hell realm or the animal realm, the afflicted spirit realm, or back into the human realm. And it's the craving, desire, attachment that is the fuel that causes rebirth. As long as there's craving in the mind, there's going to be rebirth. So in the heavenly realm, they still have cravings. That's why they're experiencing conditional pleasant feelings. And now if they don't extinguish those, they're going to be reborn into a certain realm. And they can be reborn back into the heavenly realm as well. But oftentimes they're being reborn down into the lower realms because they're, or not just the lower realms, but the human realm, because they're complacent in their development and they're not actually developing the mind because they don't have the built-in motivation that we have here in the human realm.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering what craving would you have in the heavenly realm, just even for like pleasure of what kind of cravings would you have?
The same type of cravings, right? It's like if you're a human and you have craving for existence, and maybe you're even craving to be in the heavenly realm, that can be a craving that you have, right? Just to be in the heavenly realm. But any cravings that you have in your mind here, you can essentially have those same cravings from the heavenly realm as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so Mayuli, if you'd like to read this next one, this is chapter 38.
Liberation of destruction of craving. On seeing a form with the eye, he does not crave after it if it's pleasing. He does not adverse to it if it's unpleasing. He resides with mindfulness of the body established with an immeasurable mind, and he understands as it actually is the liberation of mind and liberation of wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states are eliminated without remainder. Having thus abandoned flavor of opposing, whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful or pleasant, he does not seek excitement in that feeling, unwelcome or welcome it, or remain holding to it. As he does not do so, excitement in feelings is eliminated in him. With the elimination of his excitement comes elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging, elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence, elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth, aging and death, sorrow, pain, grief, displeasure, and despair is eliminated. Such is the elimination of this whole mass of discontentedness. On hearing a sound with the ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a physical object with the body, on recognizing a mental object with the mind, he does not crave after it if it's pleasing. He does not become adverse to it if it's unpleasing. With the elimination of his excitement comes elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging, elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence, elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth, aging and death, sorrow, pain, grief, displeasure, and despair is eliminated. Such is the elimination of this whole mass of discontentedness. Monks, remember this discourse. Give mind briefly as liberation of destructions of craving.
Okay, thank you, Mayuli. So this is that real key to understanding the elimination of central desire that we were talking about, is that you need to be able to understand what the mind's doing with its central desire, that it's longing and yearning through all these six sense bases. And because of its craving, it's going to see things as agreeable or disagreeable, or what the Buddha is describing here is favoring and opposing, right? He's using two different ways of explaining it to you so you can understand it. But what he's teaching you to do is with mindfulness of the body, those bodily sensations, by being mindful of those, that when this is arising as discontentedness, that you abandon that you cut it off and let it go. You don't allow the mind to get these conditioned pleasant feelings, and therefore it doesn't get these painful feelings. But when those feelings are arising, because you're not going to be able to be as diligent when you're first getting started and you're developing your practice, When those things are happening, you're not welcoming those feelings. You're not inviting them in. You're not clinging to them. You're not holding on to them. That's what the Buddha is describing here, that you don't continue to hold on to this agreeable and disagreeable and favor and opposing, that you cut off and let go. Whenever you notice these conditioned feelings arising, that you don't welcome it and remain holding on to it. So even if the feelings come into the mind and it's not until 1 minute later or 30 seconds later or 5 minutes later that you realize, like, oh my goodness, there's a conditioned feeling in the mind. Cut that off, right? You got to trim it back sooner and sooner and sooner until you eventually uproot this central desire where you can abandon the favoring and opposing, or this agreeable and disagreeable contact. And having eliminated that conditional pleasant feelings and the cravings, desires, attachments that are underneath of that, when you eliminate these conditional pleasant feelings, that's when the mind will eliminate its clinging. And when it eliminates its clinging, it's going to eliminate existence in this world. And when it eliminates the existence in this cycle of rebirth, you will have eliminated birth. You'll no longer be reborn. And when you're no longer reborn, you'll eliminate aging and death, and you'll eliminate sorrow, pain, grief, displeasure, and despair. This is the last section of what's called dependent origination. This is how you fully eliminate and dismantle the discontentedness. We're going to study this when we get to volume 5, that in there you're going to study dependent origination very closely. And I'll also be teaching it in the retreat coming up that I've been referencing. And I teach it at other times in the retreat, like I teach in January. But in this particular program, we'll study it in volume 5, that you're going to need to know dependent origination, because the Four Noble Truths gives you this little window into the mind in 4 simple statements. The 3 poisons or 3 unwholesome roots takes it a level deeper. And then the 10 fetters takes that a little bit deeper. But then dependent origination is explaining to you the why behind all of it. Why is the mind continuing to do this? What is it that keeps bringing this mind back into the world over and over and over again? Why is this discontentedness keep going? It's these 12 interlinking steps that the Buddha is teaching you that is helping you to be able to see what is actually leading to your rebirth and leading to your discontentedness. If you'd like to study this ahead of time, if you've got some time here or there, because it's going to take you quite a while to fully learn it and absorb it, reflect on it, and understand it, it's volume 5, chapter 14. You can look at that and look at the words of the Buddha and look at what I've shared with you there, but you're not going to probably understand it the first time you read it and digest it. So that's why you might decide to get a preview of that and start looking at it occasionally. And even you're welcome to ask questions on that privately or in the Facebook group or other things like this, because you're going to need to chip away at that. So letting go of the craving where the mind's longing, yearning through the sense spaces, wanting these pleasant feelings, is what's going to eliminate the clinging. And when you eliminate this, where the mind's holding on to this world, you'll eliminate existence in the cycle of rebirth, you eliminate birth, you eliminate aging and death, and sorrow, pain, grief, displeasure, and despair will be completely eliminated. All discontentedness will be eliminated. And this is linked to understanding central desire, because it's the mind's craving that leads to clinging. If it wasn't for the mind longing, yearning for something, it wouldn't cling to it. So in the beginning programs and the foundational programs, I talk about craving, desire, attachment, all is one thing. And I talk about it as this longing, yearning. Well, that helps somebody get started on the path to enlightenment. But now what you're going to start learning is there's actually these 2 different things in the mind. There's craving, where the mind is longing, yearning for something external, thinking that this external thing is going to provide lasting satisfaction. But then once the mind is experiencing that, then it clings and holds on. So for example, the mind might long and yearn for a new boyfriend or girlfriend. It's longing, yearning, and wanting this person. And then once you get that person in your life, you start clinging to them and you start holding on to them, wanting them to be permanent. These are 2 different things that the mind is doing. So when you understand the craving and the longing, yearning, and you're cutting that off and restraining the mind, not allowing the mind to long through these sense spaces, then you will also eliminate the clinging, where the mind's not holding on and expecting it to be permanent. This is how you get to the destruction of craving. And this is where the mind will actually get liberated. So any questions on this? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So we'll go to this chapter 39. Would someone like to read this one? Okay, we got Brent and Yihang. So since Yihang, oh, okay, Yihang, you took your hand down. Oh, go ahead, Brent. Yihang, if you would like to read the last chapter, you could read the last one since you haven't read yet.
The carrier of the burden. Monks, I will teach you the burden, the carrier of the burden, the taking up of the burden. Listen to that. And what, monks, is the burden? It should be said, the 5 aggregates subject to cleaning. What 5? The form aggregate subject to cleaning, the feeling aggregate subject to cleaning, the perception aggregate subject to cleaning, the volitional formations, choices, decisions, aggregate subject to cleaning, the consciousness aggregate subject to cleaning. This is called the burden. And what, monks, is the carrier of the burden? It should be said, the person, this venerable one of such a name and clan, this is called the carrier of the burden. And what, monks, is the taking up of the burden? It is this craving that leads to renewed existence, accompanied by excitement and desire, seeking excitement here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. This is called the taking up of the burden.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here, the Buddha is talking about these 5 aggregates, and coming back into the world over and over and over again is a burden. He talks about craving and clinging as carrying the burden. And the one who's carrying the burden is the person, because you've got the body, you've got the mind, and then you've got the person. He talks about this in other places where he talks about there is a body, there is a mind, and the combination of these two things is called the person. Some people refer to this as the observer, but the Buddha refers to it as the person. So there's the body, which is one thing. There's the mind, which is something else. And then the combination of these two things is called the person. And here he's talking about the 5 aggregates, because that's what this collection of this human being has, is it has this form, which is physical form. There's feelings in the mind. There's certain perceptions, which are views and opinions. There's volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. And then there's the mind itself. And the feelings, perceptions, volitional formations are inside the mind. So the physical form is the physical structures of the body. The feelings are those conditioned feelings, pleasant, painful, neither painful nor pleasant. The perceptions are your views and opinions that the mind can cling to. And then there's the choices and decisions, or your volitional formations. And then the consciousness, which oftentimes has the self-identity in there. This is the burden, that the mind just keeps clinging to this and keeps coming back into the world over and over and over again. If you think about the amount of time that you spend taking care of these 5 aggregates, it's enormous. If you haven't looked at this in your day-to-day life, look at what you do. When you wake up, you urinate, you defecate, you take a shower, you eat, you put on deodorant and perfumes or different things that you might be doing. You're clothing the body, you're spending time shopping, you're doing all these different things. You're combing your hair, you're getting your hair cut, you're taking care of all of these 5 aggregates over and over and over again. Spend an enormous amount of time throughout your day doing this. Right? And that's the burden that keeps getting carried around from life to life to life to life. And of course, we look at life in a positive way. And by the time you get to enlightenment, you're going to need to see life as being positive, and more you'll be able to see that. But you also need to see the truth that coming back into this world over and over and over again, picking up these 5 aggregates, it's carrying around a burden. Because ultimately you would like to put this down so that now you can get to enlightenment and you can escape the whole cycle of rebirth. So it's the person that the Buddha is saying that is keep picking up this burden. And the person is the combination of the body and the mind. So there's this third entity. And this is actually really helpful for you to understand it this way, because sometimes the mind is being unruly and the person is like looking at the mind like, what are you doing? Like, stop craving that thing. And the mind's like, no, I'm going to crave this thing. Like, come on, let's go over here and do this thing. And the person's like, no, you're not doing that. I'm not going to let you do that. And the mind's like, come on, let's go do this. Like, come on, let's do it. You're like, no, I'm just not going to let you do that. And that's the restraint that the mind can build in through the person. The person is the wise one who's now experiencing things through the mind, but you can think about these things as 3 different entities, because the person can be the logical one, where the mind in the unenlightened state is functioning through craving, anger, and ignorance. And it just wants to go out there and run around and frolic in the forest because it's untamed. And the person can be the wise one, the logical one is like, no, I'm not going to let you do that. And this is what you can do to help you in day-to-day life. And the Buddha is saying, okay, taking up this burden and continuing to crave and cling to these things, this is where the mind's going to just keep coming back into the world over and over and over again, taking up this burden. And you would ultimately like to lay this down so you don't have to keep carrying it around. So any questions here? Yes, Mayuli, the 5 aggregates, the burden is exhausting for sure. And the more you guys see that, the better, because then you'll be more motivated to lay it down. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we've got this last chapter, which is the one following this one. So yeah, Yihan, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. Elimination of craving is called the laying down of the burden. And what monks is the laying down of the burden? It is the reminderless fading away and elimination of that same craving, the giving up and letting go of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. This is called the laying down of the burden. This is what the perfectly enlightened one said. Having said this, the fortunate one, the teacher, further said this: the 5 aggregates are truly burdens. The burden carrier is the person. Taking up the burden is discontentedness in the world. Laying the burden down is joyful. Having laid the heavy burden down without taking up another burden, having taken out craving from its root, one is free from hunger, fully extinguished.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So this is a continuation from the previous one where the Buddha is saying laying down the burden is to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, giving it up, letting it go, freedom from it, non-reliance on it, where you now aren't chasing after things, but you can lay this down and realize that that's not going to lead to permanent satisfaction. And that's what you're doing with breathing mindfulness meditation, with generosity. And anytime you see those cravings coming up, you cut them off and let them go and restrain the mind, redirect the mind to something else. And using those bodily sensations as a way to clue into this craving is arising. And now, understanding and seeing the 5 aggregates as a burden and that this person keeps carrying this around, you can understand that taking up this burden is just going to lead to discontentedness in the world. But when you lay down the burden, when you lay down the cravings, desires, attachments, that's where the mind's joyful. If you ever remember back to when you were with that boyfriend or girlfriend, when you guys separated, you might have been disgruntled or agitated or annoyed. And then over time, eventually your mind let go. And you were so joyful. Your peace came back. And if you've paid attention to the mind, you can almost instantly see when the mind's letting go of some of its cravings, desires, attachments, that the joy will instantly come into the mind and the peacefulness will instantly come into the mind. So laying down these cravings, desires, attachments, that's where the joy springs up. Because with craving, desire, attachment, the mind can only be happy when it gets what it wants. But when you let go of that craving, now the mind can always be joyful. So that's what the Buddha is saying, is laying down the cravings, desires, attachments is what produces the joy in the mind. And then having laid down this heavy burden without taking up new ones, right? Because you need to train your mind to not only get rid of the cravings, desires, attachments that you currently have, but you need to be attentive to the mind and not allowing it to pick up new ones. Because that's what the mind will do. Because in the unenlightened state, with its craving, desire, attachment, it's really a master at grabbing onto things. So not only are you working to eliminate the current ones that the mind has, but you need to be attentive to not allowing it to pick up new ones as well. And having taken out craving from its root, meaning you fully got rid of these cravings, desires, attachments, that you've gotten rid of the existing ones and you're not picking up new ones, now the mind is free from hunger, meaning it's not longing, yearning, and chasing after the objects of its affection, thinking the next new shiny object waiting around the corner is going to provide lasting satisfaction. And now the mind is fully extinguished. There's no cravings, desires, attachments. This fire of craving has been extinguished. The fire of anger has been extinguished. The fire of ignorance has been extinguished. And now nothing but peace and joy in the mind. And that's what the Buddha is talking about here. So any questions on this particular chapter? Elimination of craving is called the laying down of the burden. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'd like to do is just thank all of you guys for the class. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being interested to get to enlightenment, because it's helping you, it's helping those close to you, and it's helping all of humanity. As you're becoming more and more peaceful, you're causing less and less harm in the world. You're becoming more wise. Your mind's becoming more peaceful. And yes, it's benefiting you, but it's helping all those close to you, and it's helping all of humanity become a more peaceful and loving society. So next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters. And I think that we might actually be finishing up this book next week. I think that there's 51 chapters. Let me just check. Yes, there's 51 chapters. So we're going to go all the way up to chapter 51. We have 11 chapters next week, where we're going to do 41 through 51. And then the following week, we'll be into book 3. So if you would like to read those before class or after class, you'd like to read 41 through 51. And that's what's going to be the content that we discuss next week. And then tomorrow in the group learning program, volume 1, chapter 17 is eliminating fears. Are you really scared? This is where I'm teaching people how to eliminate their fears by putting the mind in the situation that it doesn't want to be in. So you're always welcome to attend that. And then, of course, on Wednesdays, I'm doing meditation and opening up to any and all questions that you guys have. So have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Perhaps we'll see you in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee ka. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.